All right, so as Jerome said, I'm Dr. McMullen. My research is in virtual spatial audio. I believe I've talked to most of you at some point or another about my research, but this is a quick overview of what I've studied, what I've learned, and how I am working to apply it to other technologies and research applications. So about me, I got my bachelor's at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Go Chesapeake Bay Retrievers. I got my master's and PhD at the University of Michigan, and this was where I became interested in virtual spatial audio and its applications. So I know you're thinking, okay, what in the world is virtual spatial audio? So when we think about virtual environments, we primarily think of the picture on the left, where there is a person that puts on some sort of specialized glasses and they're able to perceive a 3D depiction of the world. But what in the world is, how do we design for the auditory needs in this sort of world? So it's optical processing for virtual reality is a pretty straightforward problem. It's a two-camera problem where you're presented in both eyes with two different pictures, and the combination of these pictures that the brain does automatically is what gives you this depth perception, this virtual world perception. But there's a little bit of a difference with spatial auditory processing. This problem still is being solved, and we'll get into that in a bit. So my work typically just deals with how to give the spatial sense of sound over headphones. So when you think of 3D sound in layman's terms, sometimes it's called virtual acoustics, binaural audio, spatialized sound. All of those are the same thing, and they pretty much refer to techniques where the outer ears are modeled as filters so that you can potentially place a sound anywhere in space. So what happens in this environment is that a user has on a pair of headphones, and we do some signal processing to the sound that is received with both ears. We do some, for example, some time delay, because if a sound is on, thank you, Shelby, if your sound is on your left side versus your right, it's a bit louder on your left than your right. It actually gets received at your left ear a fraction of a second before the right ear, and then there's some spectral processing because of the density of the head, the way the sound wave hits your shoulder. So we are able to characterize and combine all those things together, play them over headphones, and sort of just mimic what naturally happens so that you can hear a sound coming anywhere in space. So that's a description of what I do.
I have a quick question. What does the density of your head have to do with how you
So it's just like any other medium. So sound is a wave, and it has to propagate through some sort of medium to reach your ears. So your head is, the denser it is, that's the harder that the sound actually has to work to propagate to the other side. So there may be some shadowing, a lot more shadowing because of that.
Oh, okay.
We can actually calculate someone's head density too if we just measure the time delay of both ears. Yeah, we can do that. I'm trying to get some. There's a measurement procedure that you can pick up. So if anybody wants one, I plan to buy it in the next couple weeks. So if anybody wants to see how dense their head is,
oh, I do.
Stop by. So as you can imagine, this sort of application requires lots of kinds of people. You need a computer programmer to be able to program all the actual the effects, the signal processing stuff. You need a psychophysicist, that's someone who is experienced in the psychology of physics. You need human factors, an electrical engineer to understand signal processing, a hardware designer to make sure that the sound that we're actually conveying is fast enough in real time, and you also need someone who's expert in sound. So this area is a combination of lots of different kinds of areas. So in my previous work, as you can imagine, we're all different. As we noticed, we all have different head densities. We have all different anthropometric features, and that influences the way that sound is filtered. So the first thing that we developed was sort of how can we make a filter that people can use, because if I listen to a sound through my filter, it's different than Shelby's filter, it's different from Equation's filter, it's different than everyone's filter. So how can we develop some sort of selection procedure so that people can sort of say, okay, well, we're not going to do this long, extensive measurement procedure because it takes a long time and requires really expensive equipment, but I have a set of about 50 things that are already measured. You can listen to sounds over it and tell me, okay, that was better than that one, that was better than that. So the first was a procedure to develop these filters, then we had to train people. So now that they're able to hear the sounds, can they even locate things in space after we train them? Can you remember what you found once you found it in space? That was the next question we answered. And then the last part of my work was designing some sort of way to just look at how it would work with real world integration. So what are some features that we can add to help people be able to remember what they found in space? If we change certain factors about the sound or about the environment, how does that affect the way people think? So this is a pretty abstract topic. I know you're like, okay, what in the world does that have to do with HCC? So I'm looking more into getting into the applications of this work to other areas. So the first is training. So there's lots of combat training simulations, lots of virtual simulations where we can incorporate this 3D spatial audio in order to enhance the immersiveness of the actual environment. I was told by a soldier that the training that they do is really good, but once you get on the ground and you hear everything and you just get an idea for how loud things are and how fast sounds are coming, nothing prepared them for that. So I'm looking to get into some work with enhancing the immersion with these simulations. I'm also interested in tackling big data problems. So I think that we can use sound to sort of discover the patterns in large sets of data. So you can, let's say, potentially ascribe, let's say we have a lot of satellite data and we're trying to determine some sort of pattern of activity. So we could put each of the satellites at like a different location in space around the user, attribute a different sound to each satellite, and you could pretty much just play the satellite data and listen for patterns in the sounds rather than trying to look at 10 different graphs and say, okay, when that happens, trying to visually detect it. There may be a way to auditorily figure out some patterns in data. So that's another interest that I'd like to get into. The last interest, I'm actually writing a grant for this one. I'd like to develop assistive technology for sight impaired students. So I have an idea to sort of use this virtual spatial audio to convey very visual concepts in science. So things like in chemistry, where you need to know the structure of, let's say, water, where there's 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. If you tell somebody, all right, there's 2 hydrogens at the top, and then there's these links, and then there's option, it's not really illustrative of what's going on, versus if you were to actually make those sounds in space and put it on an iPad app and let someone who is blind be able to actually move their finger around and hear some sound that represents the hydrogen, represents the oxygen, so they can make a spatial sort of, just understand it more so spatially versus someone just telling them where things are. So, so yeah, that's what I'm currently into now. So at this point, I can take questions.
So talking about the EEG, just mention the cocktail party problem where there's a bunch of different sounds and you have to process them differently. So in your work, when you're producing sounds for, say, a very noisy environment, or you're in the rainforest or something in a game and you have a bunch of different sounds, so do you have to deal with how the brain processes those, or can you just make the sounds and then the brain and the ear does that automatically?
So a little bit of both. So I wish I had paid you to plant that question. So one of my, so the one thing is it's called stream segregation, and it's literally being able to segregate which sound is which in a huge environment. So one of my real world application sort of experiments was how dense can we make an environment and allow people to still be able to figure out what's around and not, combine sounds together and still be able to move around. And we found that if we attenuate the sound sources a lot more than what natural attenuation is. So natural attenuation is the way that a sound gets less and less loud as you move farther away from it. So if right now, natural hearing, it's an inverse squared sort of law. So as you double your distance, it goes down 6 dB. So what if we double the distance, but it goes down 12 dB? So we're attenuating it more in these denser systems, And we found that people were able to find things a lot more accurately, and that they were able to keep things, separated and not combine them into one, one sound cue. So, but that's definitely something we're looking at. Yeah, Josh?
I know like people, you can do like panning, have sound go from left to right, but like how do you get that like 270 degrees, like right back?
And outside.
Do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm. So with panning, it's more so changing the time delay between the ears and changing the level. But when you add in the factors like the spectral sorts of things, like the head shadowing, the actual shadowing like by your torso, that's what gives you the externalized effect, where it comes from right versus left and puts it outside of your head.
Okay.
So sometimes reverberation also helps with that. So having like a little bit of an echo, but then there's a point with reverberation where then it becomes a bit of a distraction. So there's a sweet spot for a good amount of reverberation too for that outside sound.
And this is all with headphones on.
This is all with headphones.
Because it's different. Like I can hear a sound, I can kind of tell you what it's from with the headphones off. I've never like been in an environment where I can do that with the headphones on, like right here in the corner.
Yeah, and actually right where you're pointing, that's like actually one of the hardest. So up high and behind the head, that's one of the hardest places to localize a sound. So there's actually a concept called front-back confusion, where the cues are very similar. So say if I had a sound that was directly in front of me, the time delay is exactly the same at both ears, and the level is the same at both ears. And the same thing could be said for that same distance behind the head. So sometimes there's this front-back confusion where the spectral differences may be so small that people aren't able to distinguish between the front and the back. That is still a challenge in the field, but it's a challenge in everyday life too. So it's not something we're just going to conquer with this.
So is it worse with more dense heads?
Shelby, I have not done a project on more dense heads.
Is there like with cars, there's an ergodynamic shape that they can be in to like optimize speed? Is there kind of like an ideal like body form or head density, shoulder, whatever, that like these people like superheroes or something like that? I know that sounds random, but
no, it's a good question. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I
The
know
alphas.
I know that
going there.
I know that some studies have shown like when people, if they're not using, all of their, a filter made with their body in mind, if they're not using that, if they use a filter with a bigger ITD, so bigger time delay, meaning a bigger head, that you're able to have the cues are a lot intrusive and better. So like I would speculate that like just having a bigger head would help. Time difference. At least it'll help with like angular, right?
Just as a note, when I first came to the States, I had a semester where I had to do English as a second language for a lot of reasons. But I'd already spoken the language, so that wasn't a problem. The way they trained people that didn't speak English really well after teaching you like in class and reading and stuff, they would give us big headphones where you would listen to people talking, and there would be one person in specific that's louder than everybody else, and that was a way for you to sort of understand conversation.
Oh, wow.
And they would play that and then ask you questions about what that person said, and then they would play with, is it louder, they make that person speak louder or, less loud according to whatever situations they're in. And then they'd ask you questions, and that's how they trained second language speakers to sort of like listen to
Might have run a secondary study.
I know, right?
That's
Yeah.
how I
But that was something interesting, yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
It's definitely like an interesting, I guess it's more like the stream segregation
Right.
sort of thing to see. Not only do you understand the words, but can you pull out the words in
Right.
context in a certain
Yeah.
conversation? Never heard that.
Are like a lot of movies today have like 3D sound, like
They're in what I say 3D sound, but it's loudspeaker delivery. And I don't have something that's, sorry, I have to draw when I talk. So like with our 3D environment, we can portray things on a perfect circle. But with like 3D display, like something that you would have like in your house or in the movies, people tend to report that there's sort of a flattened image, like where they're really good at left and right, but directly behind, like, and it's, say if you had a sound that panned behind you from left to right, there's this like gray area in here that isn't exactly that good, and it tends to be a lot closer to the head and farther from the head. So yes, it is 3D sound, but it wouldn't be as accurate if you could directly control the sound that you get through headphones. Because as you can guess, like with headphones, with loudspeakers, there's like a sweet spot you need to sit in to get the optimal sound. But let's say that you got there late to the movie theater and you're all the way in the front. You're not getting as good a sound experience as the person who's sitting directly in the middle row. So you go to the movie, sit directly in the middle. So you know that the sound was designed with you in mind, sitting right there.
Mortal Kombat had one of the best sounds.
All right, well, thank you very much.